The 15th century was a time of great upheaval for Eastern Europe, particularly in the Balkans. The region lay at the crossroads of empires, kingdoms, and cultures, each vying for dominance over fertile lands and key trade routes. On one side loomed the Ottoman Empire, a rapidly expanding Islamic power that had already swallowed much of Asia Minor and the Balkans, culminating in the fall of Constantinople in 1453. On the other side were the fragmented Christian powers of Eastern and Central Europe, the Kingdom of Hungary, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and the Holy Roman Empire. Caught between these forces were the small but strategically vital principalities of Wallachia, Moldavia, and Transylvania. These lands were often treated as buffer states, expected to provide tribute to whichever empire or kingdom exerted the most pressure at any given moment. Their rulers had to navigate an almost impossible balance, pay tribute to the Ottomans to avoid invasion, while simultaneously appeasing their Christian neighbors to avoid accusations of betrayal. This tightrope walk created a world where treachery, shifting alliances, and ruthless ambition were everyday realities. Wallachia, where Vlad the Impaler would one day reign, was particularly precarious. Situated between the Carpathian Mountains and the Danube River, it was a land both blessed and cursed. Its fertile soil supported agriculture, and its forests offered protection, but its position along the Danube made it a gateway for Ottoman armies. Wallachia's rulers thus faced the constant threat of invasion, rebellion, and political intrigue. Into this dangerous cauldron, Vlad III Dracula was born. Vlad III was born in either 1431 or 1432 in the Transylvanian town of Sighișoara, though some accounts suggest Târgoviște, the capital of Wallachia, as a possibility. He was the second son of Vlad II Dracula, ruler of Wallachia, and a member of the noble House of Drăculești. The family was an offshoot of the Basarab dynasty, which had established Wallachia as a principality in the 14th century. The name Dracul has a layered meaning. Vlad II had been inducted into the Order of the Dragon, a chivalric order founded by Sigismund of Luxembourg, King of Hungary and later Holy Roman Emperor. The order was dedicated to defending Christendom against the encroaching Ottomans, and its symbol was a dragon. In Romanian, drac could mean both dragon and devil, giving Vlad II the epithet Dracul, the dragon or the devil. His son Vlad III would thus be known as Dracula, literally son of the dragon, or by later sinister association, son of the devil. This dual meaning of the name set the stage for the duality of Vlad III's legacy, both a national defender and a monstrous tyrant, depending on one's perspective. Vlad III's childhood was marked by instability and violence. His father, Vlad II Dracula, ruled Wallachia from 1436 to 1442 and again from 1443 to 1447. During his reign, he was forced into a difficult balancing act between loyalty to Hungary and submission to the Ottoman sultans. In 1442, Sultan Murad II summoned Vlad II to his court to reaffirm his loyalty. As a guarantee of his obedience, the Sultan demanded hostages. Vlad II reluctantly agreed, sending his two younger sons, Vlad III and Radu, to live at the Ottoman court in Edirne. For Vlad III, this experience was formative. He was around 11 years old at the time, while his younger brother Radu was perhaps 7. The brothers were educated in the Ottoman courtly tradition, learning Turkish, Persian military strategy and the Quran. They were treated well in some respects. After all, the Ottomans wanted to mold them into allies, but the arrangement was nonetheless one of captivity. Vlad grew up surrounded by the culture of his enemies, under constant pressure to conform. This period instilled in Vlad a deep and abiding hatred of the Ottomans, as well as a lifelong mistrust of those he perceived as traitors. Some historians argue that his later brutality, particularly his infamous use of impalement, was influenced by methods of punishment he witnessed or learned about during his Ottoman captivity. His younger brother Radu, however, adapted differently. He became close to Sultan Mehmed II, converted to Islam, and earned the epithet Radu the Handsome. This division between the brothers foreshadowed the conflicts to come. In 1447, Vlad II Dracula was assassinated by boyars, Wallachian nobles, who opposed his pro-Ottoman policies, with Hungarian support likely playing a role. Vlad III's elder brother, Mircea II, was brutally blinded and buried alive. This left young Vlad III with a burning desire for revenge against both internal traitors and external enemies. With his father and brother dead and Wallachia in turmoil, Vlad III sought to reclaim his throne. His first attempt came in 1448, when he briefly seized power with Ottoman backing, after the death of Hungary's regent John Hunyadi at the Battle of Kosovo. But Vlad's rule lasted only a few months before Hunyadi's forces drove him out, installing Vladislav II as ruler instead. Vlad fled to Moldavia and later to Hungary, spending years in exile and waiting for the right moment to strike. These early experiences, being a hostage witnessing the murder of his family and fighting to reclaim his inheritance, shaped Vlad into a hardened, ruthless figure. He learned that Wallachia was a land where loyalty was fickle, betrayal was commonplace, and survival depended on fear as much as diplomacy. By the time he was in his 20s, Vlad had already lived through enough betrayal and bloodshed to harden him into the figure history remembers, Vlad the Impaler. His upbringing, at the crossroads of Christianity and Islam, Hungary and the Ottoman Empire, loyalty and treachery forged in him a world-view where mercy was weakness and terror was power. The throne of Wallachia was not inherited smoothly like that of Western European monarchies. Instead, it was contested by various branches of the Basarab dynasty, with rival claimants often supported by external powers such as Hungary or the Ottoman Empire. The boyars, Wallachia's powerful noble families, also played a decisive role, frequently switching sides depending on who seemed most likely to win. In this environment, becoming voivode, Prince of Wallachia, was one challenge, but keeping the title was an even greater one. Vlad III Dracula, hardened by his youth in Ottoman captivity and exile, was determined to claim his place. His first opportunity came in the autumn of 1448, when John Hunyadi, regent of Hungary and a staunch opponent of the Ottomans, suffered a crushing defeat at the Second Battle of Kosovo. The Ottomans, seeking to exploit Hungary's weakness, supported Vlad as a candidate for Wallachia's throne against Vladislav II, a ruler allied with Hunyadi. With Ottoman backing, Vlad seized Wallachia's capital Târgoviște and declared himself voivode. Yet his position was precarious from the outset. His authority depended almost entirely on the support of the Ottomans, which alienated many Wallachian boyars who favored independence or alignment with Hungary. Moreover, Vlad lacked the resources, experience, and networks of loyalty needed to consolidate his hold. Within weeks, Hunyadi regrouped and sent forces against him. Vladislav II, returning with Hungarian support, forced Vlad to flee. After only about 2 months on the throne, Vlad was deposed. His first reign had ended almost as soon as it began. Though short-lived, this episode was significant. Vlad had shown both his ambition and his willingness to play one empire against another. More importantly, he had gained a taste of power and learned how fragile it was in Wallachia. His brief rule foreshadowed the ruthless strategies he would later adopt to ensure that when he returned, he would not be so easily removed. Following his expulsion, Vlad wandered between Moldavia and Hungary, seeking allies and patrons. He spent time under the protection of his cousin, Stephen of Moldavia, who would later become the famed Stephen the Great. Eventually, Vlad secured the patronage of John Hunyadi himself, the very man who had ousted him. This alliance may seem surprising, but it reflected the ever-shifting political realities of the region. Hunyadi, though wary of Vlad, recognized him as a potential asset against the Ottomans. For Vlad, aligning with Hungary gave him the chance to rebuild his credibility and bide his time until another opportunity to seize Wallachia arose. During these years, Vlad honed his political skills, learning how to maneuver among powerful patrons while plotting his eventual return. He also deepened his hatred of betrayal, noting how quickly loyalties could change. His experiences in exile reinforced his conviction that only fear, rather than loyalty or kindness, could ensure stability in Wallachia. In 1456, the political landscape of Eastern Europe shifted dramatically. John Hunyadi died of plague after his victory against the Ottomans at Belgrade. His death left a power vacuum in Hungary and weakened Wallachian resistance to internal upheaval. Vladislav II, the reigning voivode of Wallachia, was vulnerable. Sensing his chance, Vlad moved quickly. With Hungarian support, he invaded Wallachia, defeated Vladislav II in battle, and killed him. The exact details of the conflict are murky. Some sources suggest Vlad slew Vladislav in single combat. But what mattered was the outcome. Vlad Dracula reclaimed the throne of Wallachia, this time determined to hold it by any means necessary. In the summer of 1456, Vlad III Dracula began his second reign as voivode of Wallachia. Unlike his brief rule in 1448, this reign would last for 6 years and establish his enduring legacy. He inherited a realm weakened by decades of internal strife and external pressures, with disloyal boyars plotting constantly and the Ottomans demanding tribute. From the beginning, Vlad understood that if he was to maintain his grip on power, he needed to transform Wallachia into a disciplined, centralized state under his iron hand. He could no longer afford to be a puppet of foreign powers or a mere claimant at the mercy of noble factions. Instead, he would rule through fear, reshaping the political landscape of Wallachia with his infamous brutality. It was during this early stage of his second reign that Vlad began implementing the policies that would earn him the epithet Țepeș, meaning the Impaler. His use of impalement as a method of execution was not unique. Impalement had long been practiced in the Ottoman Empire and other parts of the world, but Vlad employed it on a scale and with a theatrical flair that shocked contemporaries and cemented his reputation. His aim was not only to punish but to terrorize. By making examples of boyars who betrayed him, thieves who defied him, and enemies who resisted him, Vlad sent a clear message. Loyalty would be rewarded with protection, but disloyalty would be met with gruesome death. This reign of terror was not cruelty for its own sake, but a calculated political strategy. Wallachia was a land of shifting allegiances, where rulers were often murdered or overthrown within years. Vlad recognized that fear was a more reliable tool than persuasion. If he could make his subjects fear him more than they feared his rivals or foreign overlords, he could secure stability. Yet Vlad could never ignore the looming threat of the Ottoman Empire. Though he initially agreed to pay tribute, he despised the idea of Wallachia as a vassal state. As his power grew, he prepared for open defiance against the sultans. His years as a hostage had given him first-hand knowledge of Ottoman culture, strategy, and weaknesses, knowledge he would use in the years to come. By the late 1450s, Vlad stood on the brink of a new chapter. Having survived exile, betrayal, and a failed first reign, he was now voivode once more, armed with ruthless determination and a vision for Wallachia built on fear. Ahead lay his most famous campaigns, against his own boyars, against thieves and criminals, and most famously, against the mighty Ottomans themselves. When Vlad seized the Wallachian throne in 1456, his position was still precarious. Wallachia was fragmented by rival noble factions, many of whom had supported previous rulers. Worse still, these boyars were infamous for betrayal. They had shifted allegiance between Hungarians, Ottomans, and rival claimants with astonishing speed. Vlad understood that if he did not act decisively, he would be overthrown or assassinated, just as his father and elder brother had been. His strategy was simple but ruthless. Eliminate rivals, terrify the nobility, and centralize power in his own hands. Vlad believed that Wallachia's chronic instability stemmed from the unchecked power of the boyars. Therefore, he set out to crush them through a campaign of terror that would leave no doubt about who truly ruled Wallachia. One of the most infamous episodes of Vlad's reign occurred in 1457. According to tradition, Vlad invited hundreds of boyars to an Easter banquet at Târgoviște. During the feast, he accused them of treachery and complicity in his father's death. Some were executed on the spot. Others, particularly the elderly and less capable, were impaled immediately as an example. The younger and stronger nobles were marched on foot to Ponari Castle in the Carpathians, where they were forced into slave labor to rebuild and fortify the stronghold. This event, sometimes referred to as the Easter Massacre, served a dual purpose. It eliminated a large portion of the treacherous boyar class while simultaneously striking terror into those who remained. It also allowed Vlad to repopulate Wallachia's nobility with men of humbler origins. Merchants, peasants, and soldiers, loyal to him, rather than to old aristocratic families. By dismantling the boyars' power, Vlad sought to create a more centralized, disciplined state. Vlad's reforms were not limited to noble politics. They extended to the daily lives of common Wallachians. He developed a reputation for draconian justice, enforcing harsh punishments for theft, corruption, and laziness. One famous legend tells of a golden cup placed at a public fountain in Târgoviște. Though it was free for anyone to use, no one dared steal it, so great was the fear of Vlad's punishments. Another tale describes a peasant who complained that his shirt was stolen. Vlad ordered the thief hunted down and executed, and then rewarded the peasant for his honesty by giving him fine clothes. These stories, whether entirely true or embellished, reveal how Vlad's reign of terror served as a form of law enforcement. By making punishment swift and horrifying, he cultivated a society where crime was rare, though obedience came not from respect, but from fear. Vlad's preferred method of execution, impalement, was both practical and symbolic. Victims were skewered on wooden stakes, often left to die slowly in excruciating pain. Vlad did not use impalement merely to kill, but to send a message. The bodies, left to rot on display, created terrifying spectacles that warned others of the consequences of disobedience. Accounts from contemporaries describe forests of the impaled outside Wallachian cities and along trade routes. The German chronicler Michael Beheim wrote lurid tales of thousands of people impaled at once, their corpses lining the roads. Ottoman envoys, too, reported such displays, noting the psychological impact they had on both Wallachians and invading soldiers. Though the numbers were likely exaggerated by hostile sources, there is little doubt that Vlad employed impalement on a grand scale. The spectacle served to cement his reputation as both a cruel tyrant and a feared protector of his realm. Beyond brutality, Vlad sought to reshape Wallachia into a state that could withstand both internal treachery and external threats. His reforms aimed at strengthening the economy, ensuring military readiness, and reducing dependence on foreign powers. He encouraged trade by securing roads and punishing banditry harshly, making Wallachia a safer place for merchants. He demanded strict discipline from his army, rewarding loyalty with protection and spoils. He also cultivated ties with towns in Transylvania, ensuring access to markets and supplies. At the same time, Vlad resisted paying tribute to the Ottomans, a stance that set him on a collision course with Sultan Mehmed II. By consolidating power internally, Vlad prepared Wallachia for the inevitable confrontation with the most powerful empire of the era. Reactions to Vlad's reign varied dramatically, depending on perspective. To many of his subjects, particularly peasants and common townsfolk, he was a ruler who brought order and stability in a land plagued by chaos. To boyars, merchants, and rival powers, he was a tyrant whose cruelty knew no bounds. Foreign chroniclers, particularly from Saxon towns in Transylvania, depicted him as a bloodthirsty monster. Their accounts, often exaggerations or outright propaganda, would later inspire the legend of Count Dracula. Yet within Romania, Vlad was remembered in folklore as a just ruler, harsh but fair, who defended his people from foreign domination. By the early 1460s, Vlad had transformed Wallachia into a disciplined, centralized principality under his absolute control. He had subdued the boyars, enforced law and order with merciless justice, and prepared his armies for war. But his defiance of the Ottomans could not last forever. Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, would not tolerate a rebellious vassal on his frontier. In 1462, the clash between Vlad the Impaler and the mighty Ottoman Empire erupted into one of the most brutal and dramatic conflicts of the 15th century. In 1361, Vlad III Dracula had consolidated his authority in Wallachia. He had crushed the boyars, enforced law and order, and ruled with a mixture of iron discipline and terror. But his most dangerous challenge came not from within, but from beyond his borders, the Ottoman Empire. For decades, Wallachia had paid tribute to the sultans as a vassal state, supplying money, troops, and loyalty. Vlad's father, Vlad II Dracula, had been forced into such arrangements, as had many rulers before him. Yet Vlad III was different. He despised the Ottomans, remembered his years as their hostage, and refused to be treated as a servant of the Sultan. In 1461, he openly defied Mehmed II, the very conqueror who had taken Constantinople in 1453, Vlad refused to pay tribute, captured Ottoman envoys, and, according to some accounts, had them impaled rather than negotiate. This brazen act of defiance ensured war. Rather than wait for the Ottomans to invade, Vlad struck first. In the winter of 1461-1462, he launched a daring campaign across the Danube River, leading surprise raids into Ottoman territory in Bulgaria. His army burned villages, destroyed fortresses, and slaughtered thousands. Chroniclers report that Vlad's forces employed scorched earth tactics, leaving nothing behind but ashen corpses. These raids terrified local Ottoman garrisons and demonstrated Vlad's audacity. He showed that even a small principality like Wallachia could strike deep into Ottoman lands if led by a fearless and ruthless commander. For Mehmed II, however, this was an unforgivable insult. The Sultan, who prided himself as the scourge of Christendom and the master of the East, could not allow a minor prince to humiliate him. In the spring of 1462, Mehmed II gathered a massive army, estimated by some sources at over 100,000 soldiers, though likely smaller in reality. Even at reduced numbers, it dwarfed Vlad's Wallachian forces, which may have numbered only 20,000, 30,000. The Ottomans crossed the Danube, advancing toward Târgoviște, the Wallachian capital. Facing such overwhelming odds, most rulers would have retreated or surrendered. Vlad, however, turned to unconventional warfare. Ambushes, scorched earth, and psychological terror. He ordered the countryside stripped of supplies, villages burned, and wells poisoned. Peasants were instructed to flee into the forests and mountains, leaving nothing of value for the advancing Ottoman army. At the same time, Vlad's forces waged relentless guerrilla warfare, harassing Ottoman columns, attacking at night, and melting away before a counterattack could form. As the Ottomans advanced deeper into Wallachia, they encountered one of Vlad's most notorious displays of terror. Near Târgoviște, they discovered what chroniclers described as a forest of the impaled. Thousands of Ottoman prisoners of war, peasants and rebels, skewered on stakes lining the roads and fields. The sight horrified the Ottoman soldiers. Even hardened warriors accustomed to brutality were shaken by the sheer scale of the massacre. The spectacle was not just cruelty, it was psychological warfare. Vlad intended to terrify his enemies into submission, showing them the fate that awaited invaders. According to one account, even Sultan Mehmed II was unsettled by the grisly scene, remarking that one could not rule a land where such a man reigned. Though likely embellished, the story illustrates how Vlad's reputation as Tsepesh was central to his military strategy. The climax of the 1462 campaign came on the night of June 16-17. With the Ottoman army encamped near Târgoviște, Vlad launched a daring surprise attack. Leading a force of several thousand men, he infiltrated the Ottoman camp under cover of darkness, his soldiers disguised in Ottoman uniforms and shouting Turkish commands to sow confusion. Their target was Sultan Mehmed himself. Vlad hoped to strike directly at the Sultan's tent, kill him, and plunge the Ottoman army into chaos. In the confusion of the night battle, Wallachian forces attacked relentlessly, setting fire to tents, killing soldiers in their sleep, and throwing the entire camp into disarray. Though Vlad did not succeed in killing Mehmed, the attack inflicted heavy casualties and spread panic among the Ottomans. Contemporary sources claim that thousands were slain, though numbers are uncertain. The psychological effect was immense. The mighty Ottoman army, fresh from its conquest of Constantinople, had been thrown into near chaos by a much smaller Wallachian force. Despite the success of the night attack, the sheer size of the Ottoman army forced Vlad into retreat. Mehmed continued his advance, capturing some Wallachian fortresses, yet the Sultan ultimately failed to subdue Wallachia fully. Facing disease, supply shortages, and the constant threat of ambush, Mehmed withdrew his forces later that summer. Vlad had not defeated the Ottomans outright, but he had achieved a remarkable defensive victory. He had preserved Wallachian independence, at least temporarily, and inflicted humiliating losses on one of the most powerful armies of the era. His reputation as a fearsome defender of Christendom soared, especially in Europe, where pamphlets and chronicles spread tales of his exploits. Yet Vlad's triumph was fragile. His brutal methods had alienated many of his subjects, and his younger brother, Radu the Handsome, remained a rival claimant supported by the Ottomans. Though he had stood firm against Mehmed II, Vlad's rule was about to face internal challenges that would prove just as dangerous as foreign invasion. Though Vlad had survived the Ottoman invasion of 1462, his situation quickly deteriorated. His victory was costly. Wallachia lay devastated by war, its population exhausted, and its nobility resentful of his relentless brutality. Moreover, the Ottomans, though repelled, had not been defeated, and they now threw their support behind his younger brother, Radu the Handsome. Radu, who had converted to Islam and become a favorite of Sultan Mehmed II, was the perfect candidate for the Sultan's purposes. Unlike Vlad, Radu was pliable, charming, and willing to serve Ottoman interests. Supported by both the Ottomans and Wallachian boyars, weary of Vlad's reign of terror, Radu quickly gathered momentum. By the late summer of 1462, Radu had gained significant support within Wallachia. Facing mounting opposition, Vlad fled northward to Transylvania, seeking aid from his one-time ally, King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary, son of John Hunyadi. Vlad hoped to rally Hungarian support to reclaim his throne and continue resisting the Ottomans. But Corvinus, wary of provoking Mehmed II and swayed by Saxon merchants hostile to Vlad, turned against him. To justify abandoning his ally, Corvinus produced forged documents suggesting Vlad was in secret correspondence with the Ottomans. Whether Corvinus believed the forgeries or used them as a convenient excuse remains debated, but the result was clear. Instead of receiving aid, Vlad was arrested. Vlad spent the next 12 years in captivity, from roughly 1462 to 1474. The exact conditions of his imprisonment are debated. Some accounts suggest he was held in relative comfort in Visegrad or Buda, treated more like a political prisoner than a common criminal. Other stories, fueled by legend, claim he was kept in harsh conditions and displayed his cruelty even behind bars, impaling rats and birds to pass the time. During his imprisonment, Vlad's reputation continued to spread across Europe. German pamphlets and chronicles circulated lurid tales of his atrocities, often exaggerating them for effect. Stories of mass impalements, cannibalism, and sadistic cruelty portrayed him as a monster. Yet in some circles, particularly among those who feared Ottoman expansion, he was still admired as a fierce defender of Christendom. Vlad's fortunes began to shift in the 1470s. During his captivity, he married Ilona Silagya, a relative of Matthias Corvinus, strengthening his ties to the Hungarian court. This alliance improved his standing, and by the mid-1470s, the changing political situation made Vlad useful once again. The Ottoman threat loomed larger than ever, and Hungary needed strong leaders on its frontier. Vlad, despite his brutality, was an experienced commander with an unmatched knowledge of Ottoman tactics. In 1475, after years of imprisonment, Corvinus finally released him and restored him as a vassal ally. In 1476, with Hungarian support, Vlad returned to Wallachia for a third time. His enemy, Radu the Handsome, had died in 1475, but Ottoman-backed claimants still threatened his rule. Vlad marched into Wallachia and reasserted his authority, but his position was far weaker than in his earlier reign. The land had been ravaged by decades of warfare, its nobility fragmented, and its people weary of endless conflict. Vlad's return was short-lived. Within months of reclaiming power, he faced another Ottoman invasion. This time, however, he lacked the strength and resources to mount the kind of daring defense that had made him famous in 1462. The circumstances of Vlad's death remain murky, surrounded by conflicting accounts and legends. Most sources agree that he died in December 1476, either in battle against the Ottomans near Bucharest or betrayed by his own boyars. Some claim he was decapitated, with his head sent to Mehmed II in Constantinople as proof of his death. His body was reportedly buried at the monastery of Snagov, north of Bucharest, though excavations have never conclusively confirmed his resting place. The uncertainty surrounding his burial has only added to the aura of mystery that surrounds him, feeding later myths that would conflate Vlad with the fictional vampire Count Dracula. By the time of his death, Vlad the Impaler was already a figure of legend. To the Ottomans and Saxons of Transylvania, he was a cruel tyrant, a sadist whose love of impalement surpassed all human understanding. To some in Hungary and among his Wallachian supporters, however, he was remembered as a defender of his land and faith, a man who stood against impossible odds to resist the Ottomans. His short, violent life epitomized the brutal politics of 15th century Eastern Europe, shifting alliances, betrayal, endless wars, and the struggle of small states caught between empires. Vlad's story was not unique in its bloodshed, but the theatrical scale of his cruelty ensured that his name would echo through history long after his death. Even during his lifetime, Vlad III Dracula's notoriety spread far beyond Wallachia. His reliance on theatrical cruelty and public displays of impalement ensured that his deeds were not easily forgotten. But his reputation as a bloodthirsty tyrant was also shaped and in many cases exaggerated by propaganda from his political enemies. The Saxons of Transylvania, in particular, were among his fiercest detractors. Vlad had clashed with them repeatedly during his reign, punishing their merchants harshly for defying his authority or undermining his rule. In retaliation, Saxon printers in the German states produced lurid pamphlets that portrayed Vlad as a sadistic monster. These pamphlets, printed in the 1460s and 1470s, were among the first mass-produced works in Europe and spread his infamy far and wide. They told tales of unimaginable cruelty, of Vlad boiling people alive, cutting them into pieces, roasting children, and forcing parents to eat them. Many of these stories were grotesque exaggerations or outright fabrications, but they had a powerful impact, cementing Vlad's image in the Western European imagination as a man of almost inhuman savagery. While the Saxon accounts demonized Vlad, Romanian folklore remembered him differently. Among Wallachian peasants, Vlad was not simply a tyrant, but a ruler who had imposed order in a land long plagued by chaos. Legends emphasized his fairness, however brutal, in punishing thieves, liars, and corrupt boyars. One common story tells of a merchant who left his cart unguarded in Târgoviște overnight, expecting it to be robbed. Instead, it remained untouched, for the fear of Vlad's punishments was stronger than the temptation of theft. Another tale recalls a peasant who complained that his ox was stolen. Vlad not only found the thief and punished him, but restored the ox to its owner. To the peasantry, these tales cast Vlad as a harsh but just protector, someone who, though merciless, ensured safety and order in a dangerous world. Thus, within Romanian memory, he came to embody the archetype of the stern but righteous ruler. The stark contrast between Western and Eastern depictions of Vlad highlights the role of perspective in shaping historical memory. To the Saxons and Ottomans, Vlad was a devil. To many Wallachians, he was a national hero who had defended his people against invaders and imposed justice on corrupt elites. This duality of memory, hero in the East, villain in the West, created fertile ground for myth-making. Vlad became larger than life, both demonized and celebrated, his story retold with embellishments that blurred the line between fact and fiction. Centuries after Vlad's death, his name resurfaced in European literature, detached from the details of his reign but infused with the sinister aura his legend had acquired. The pivotal moment came in 1897, when Irish author Bram Stoker published Dracula. Stoker's vampire count was not a faithful representation of Vlad the Impaler, but the connection between the two is undeniable. Stoker borrowed the name Dracula, which he discovered in a book about Wallachian history, noting its association with the devil in Romanian. He also incorporated elements of Vlad's reputation for cruelty and his ties to Transylvania. In Dracula, the Count is an immortal vampire who feeds on human blood, a supernatural extension of Vlad's historical reputation for bloodthirstiness. Though Stoker never explicitly identified his Dracula with Vlad the Impaler, the association became widespread, fusing the historical figure with the fictional monster in the popular imagination. From the 15th century pamphlets to Stoker's novel, the legend of Vlad Dracula evolved continuously. The transition from tyrant to vampire overlord illustrates how history can be reshaped through cultural storytelling. In the 20th and 21st centuries, Vlad's image was further popularized through films, novels, and media. From Bela Lugosi's iconic portrayal of Count Dracula in 1931 to countless modern adaptations, the vampire legend has eclipsed the historical prince. Yet in Romania, Vlad Tepes remains a symbol of national pride. his memory tied not to vampirism, but to resistance against the Ottoman Empire and the defense of his land. The legend of Vlad the Impaler endures because it embodies universal themes: the tension between justice and cruelty, the thin line between hero and villain, and the enduring power of fear as a tool of control. Whether remembered as a sadistic tyrant or a national defender, Vlad left behind a legacy that resonates far beyond his own time. Romania, Vlad III Dracula, occupies a complex but largely positive place in national history. While his methods were undeniably brutal, many Romanians view him as a leader who defended his country's independence against overwhelming foreign powers. His ruthless punishments are often framed not as sadism, but as a necessary response to treachery and lawlessness in a chaotic age. Romanian folklore and literature frequently celebrate Vlad as a just ruler who imposed order and fairness, especially in contrast to corrupt boyars or foreign occupiers. In this tradition, his cruelty was not senseless but purposeful, directed against thieves, liars, and traitors. Even centuries later, tales of his strict justice are told as moral lessons about honesty and obedience. Vlad's role as a defender against the Ottomans has made him a symbol of national pride. Romania, caught for centuries between powerful empires, often found itself on the defensive. Vlad's defiance of the Sultan, particularly during the campaign of 1462, became emblematic of Romanian resistance to foreign domination. In the 19th century, during the rise of nationalism in Eastern Europe, Romanian intellectuals revived Vlad's image as part of a broader movement to construct a proud national identity. Writers, poets, and historians emphasized his heroism and downplayed or reinterpreted his cruelty. In this context, Vlad became less of a bloodthirsty tyrant and more of a national martyr who fought valiantly against impossible odds. Outside Romania, Vlad's reputation developed along a different trajectory. In Western Europe, the Saxon pamphlets and German chronicles from the 15th century had long cast him as a monster. These accounts, filled with grotesque details of his supposed atrocities, influenced later historians and writers who often repeated the tales without question. As a result, Western memory of Vlad remained dominated by the image of the sadistic impaler. When Bram Stoker wrote Dracula in the late 19th century, it was this demonized portrayal that colored his interpretation, helping to fuse Vlad's name with the image of a blood-drinking monster. Thus, while Romanians celebrated him as a national hero, Western culture remembered him primarily as a villain, a dual legacy that persists to this day. In modern Romania, Vlad the Impaler has been embraced as both a historical figure and a cultural icon. Statues of him stand in towns like Târgoviște and Bucharest, and his name adorns streets, schools, and institutions. His castle at Poenari, though in ruins, attracts visitors intrigued by his history, while Bran Castle, though historically unrelated to Vlad, has become internationally marketed as Dracula's Castle, a major tourist destination. Romanian tourism often walks a careful line between celebrating Vlad's historical role and capitalizing on the Dracula legend that attracts global visitors. During the communist era, particularly under Nicolae Ceausescu in the 20th century, Vlad was celebrated as a model of strong leadership. Ceausescu's regime highlighted his defense of national sovereignty and used him as propaganda to emphasize the need for discipline, order, and resistance to foreign influence. Globally, Vlad's legacy is inseparable from the Dracula myth. Films, novels, and popular culture continue to reinterpret his figure, blending history and fiction. While scholars emphasize the distinction between the historical voivode and the fictional vampire, the two are permanently intertwined in the popular imagination. Yet this fascination has also fueled renewed historical interest. Historians and archaeologists continue to study Vlad's reign, separating fact from legend and re-examining his policies and campaigns in light of contemporary evidence. His reign provides valuable insights into the political, military, and cultural realities of the Balkans in the 15th century. Ultimately, Vlad the Impaler's legacy is dual and paradoxical. In Romania, he is remembered as a national hero, a ruler who fought valiantly for independence and imposed justice in a time of chaos. In the West, he is remembered as a tyrant and a monster, his name immortalized in horror fiction as Count Dracula This duality reflects the way history and myth intertwine, shaped by perspective, propaganda, and cultural storytelling. Vlad's legacy is not fixed but fluid, evolving with each generation that retells his story.